opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. Today we are going to be doing a very special show, and this show was requested by a viewer. We're going to be talking about 504s. So thank you for writing in your idea. We really appreciate when you guys write in your ideas. I'm Shannon Penrod, and I identify as a proud pony. I'm a parent of a neurodiverse individual, and very excited to identify that way. Those are the words that my son and I talked about and that he gave to me and said, this is a great way that you can describe that. And so that's why I use those words. We're premiering this show right now for you guys. It's the first time it's ever aired. You have the ability to write in and interact. I am literally on the road at the moment that you are seeing this because I'm at one of our offices, being able to be there and meet with people there. But I hope I will have an opportunity to log on and see some of the questions, and I'll definitely have the ability to do that later on. So feel free to ask questions. We are live right now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and the show will podcast later on and be available for you wherever you download your podcasts. And our fabulous Chris Desmond is going to show you some of those places on the screen right now for those of you who are interested in that, but it's all the places you get your podcasts. We do like to tell you that when you download the audio podcast, you will get advertisements that will break up the podcast for you. We hope that you'll embrace that, because the whole reason why that advertising is there is that's what makes it free for you. So embrace those sponsors. We certainly do, because it's very important to us that we bring this information to you free of charge to you. Now, I do know that some of you have said, yeah, but I'm trying to run and it helps if I can keep listening, and I don't want to listen to the advertisement, and I'd rather pay for it myself, and we made that possible for you. So if you go to glow.fm/autismlive, you can subscribe there. It's $5 a month, and when you do that, you will get everything that the Autism Network does. That's Autism Live, Ask Dr. Doreen, all the other shows, including our new podcast, which is only available audio only right now. That is today's Hyperfixation with Atticus Jackson. It's so good, you guys. I hope that you'll download that and check that out. It's a shorter podcast, but really fascinating. We're so happy and honored and thrilled to be incubating that podcast for him here. So definitely check that out. I hope you'll enjoy it and let us know. So today, and I know how verbose I can get, so I want to launch into this. So today we're talking about the 504s, and I came up with 10 things that you should know about 504 plans for students on the autism spectrum. And this is one of those parent-to-parent talks that we do from time to time. I always like to make sure that I'm, label it such. It's a parent-to-parent. I think sometimes it's important to state what your intentions are, right? And my intention here is to support parents as they're looking at a 504 plan or an IEP plan. Our intention here is not to be re-educating people in the education field, although if they tune in and watch this and change their minds about 3 or 4 things, I'm okay with that too. But the intention is that this is for parents of school-aged kids that you're going and having regular meetings with the special education department. Your child has a diagnosis of autism. You're talking about IEPs and you're talking about 504s. And we know that schools are talking more and more about 504s, so it's becoming more and more important that we discuss what the differences are and what the nuances are and what the ramifications are if you're on a 504 plan, not an IEP. So hopefully this will make this a little more crystal clear. However, and Chris, I don't know if you got it, I emailed you, there's a new resource that we have that is, I think, one of the best resources that we've discovered in the 14 years we've been doing this. I did not know this until about a month and a half ago, that it is the law of the land that in addition to IDEA, which is what looks at IEPs and helps to inform what they legally need to be, that part of the consideration, we all know that, because I talk about it here all the time, that IDEA has never been fully funded by anybody. We've had so many presidents, nobody has ever fully funded it. So it's not as much of a bipartisan kind of a situation. Nobody has funded it. But what they have funded, what they required, is that each state have at least one parent hub center that was available for parents free of charge, that they could get good advice about 504s and IEPs. So the website, and I don't know if Chris has it, but it's parentcenterhub.org. And if you go there, it says find my center, you'll find your state, and then you find the one that's closest to you, and it has the appropriate, because they have some that are just function in different languages and not just Spanish. It's very exciting. It's all free resources. I just want to say out the gate, that's a fabulous resource to go to if you're having questions about IEPs and 504s. But today we're just going to drill down on 504. So let's go ahead to our first slide, which is always about the disclaimers, right? We all want to acknowledge that I am a parent. I am not a lawyer, an advocate, or a paid educational consultant. So, you're going to take everything that I say and then go do your own research. This is meant to be information of a general nature, but please consult professionals whenever you have the opportunity about your specific case. And please, I hope this leads you to do the research that will lead you to your best answers, because I don't know your individual case, or a lot of times I don't know your school district or your state. This is just information of a general nature. Now, there's also a little bit of an asterisk here too. There's some things that we're going to talk about, and I'll try to remember to point them out when they come up. But there are times when I will say to you on the slide that a 504 doesn't do something. And I want to make sure that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Sometimes the 504 allows for some things. It's just that if you were trying to get that from the 504, it makes more sense to get it from the IEP. Does that make sense? That, like for instance, one of the slides we'll show is that you can't, 504 is about accommodations, not about services. That's a little bit inaccurate. You can get some services, but the main point is that if you were going to go for services, you shouldn't be in a 504 plan, because what's going to accommodate it so much better is the IEP, and I'll try to remember to talk about that and why. Okay, so let's go through the 10 really quickly, and then I'll go back and explain all of them. So the first thing that you need to know is that 504 plans are overseen by ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, that's one thing to know. Let's move on to number 2. 504 plans are meant to be implemented in the general education classroom setting. That might be something that you didn't know. Number 3 is 504 plans often accommodate, I can't even speak. Offer accommodations, not services. Remember, there's an asterisk there. Number 4, it's very easy to go from an IEP plan to a 504 plan, but the opposite is not true. Number 5, colleges do not follow IEP guidelines, but they do follow ADA guidelines, which means they allow for 504 plans. Isn't that exciting? Number 6. 504 plans don't transfer to college. This is a much debated thing. We'll elucidate this further later on. Number 7, there is no need to have both an IEP plan and a 504 plan. It's much stronger if you go with one, and if you need a stronger one, you go with IEP, but we'll talk about that. Number 8, accommodations are specific to the individual, and we've given you a list of accommodations there. We'll go through those in a minute. Number 9, 504 plans for equity and access. IEPs plan for educational benefit. That's a big difference. And both are great, but it's a big difference depending on what you need. And number 10, 504 plans don't have to track progress. If you have an IEP, they have to give you regular progress reports. They don't have to do that with a 504 plan. Big difference. Look at the shock on the cat's face. Yeah. Okay, let's go back to the beginning now and let's dive into these. So 504 plans are overseen by the Americans with Disability Act. IEP plans are overseen by IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So right there you can see that there's some difference in the language because IEPs and IDEA are specific to education, whereas ADA is not. ADA says that any place, any public place has to be accessible for individuals with disabilities. And we'll talk about this over and over and over again, that ADA says there has to be access and it has to be fair. It has to be equitable. And that's really what ADA is about. It's amazing. It's an important act. It changed the world. Being the daughter of a mom who had a physical handicap, ADA is very important to me, and I think that it's an important tool for individuals who are on the autism spectrum as well. And we will find ourselves talking about 504 and about ADA on a regular basis throughout the lifespan of an individual on the autism spectrum, because access is important and equity in access is important. But it's really critical to understand that it's a different set of laws. So you're arguing different things with different people if you have a 504 plan. Okay, let's move on to number 2. 504 plans are meant to be implemented in a general education classroom setting. So for me, this is where the tree starts to go like this. If you have a child who needs to be in a special education classroom, this should be your first indication that they should not be on a 504 plan. They should be on an IEP. And we've had tons of experts, and for years we had Bonnie Yates come and be our legal expert on a regular basis before she retired. And we miss her wholeheartedly. But Bonnie would always say, you know, if your child has an autism spectrum diagnosis, you should be fighting for the IEP. So we're going to start to talk about why. Because I think there's some nuance to this that, you know, really in the best of all possible worlds, I think what we all hope and want for is to get to the point when our child doesn't need the IEP anymore, and then you would transfer to a 504 plan. So if that's the promised land and we all want to get there, how do we get there? And how do we make sure that the school doesn't push us into a 504 plan before we're ready? And my personal advice to people is, I wouldn't be looking at doing that until you're in your child's last year of school. Why? Why? Well, it's all going to become clear as you see the differences between these things. You have so much more control over so many more things when you are talking about the IEP. And by the way, there are many parts of a 504 that the IEP will also address. So we love the things in the 504 plan. We just want more. And that's why we get the IEP going. So if your child is in special education and requires special education services, off the bat, if the school is coming to you asking for a 504 plan, you need to dig your heels in and say no. And there are many quotes online that say the 504 plan is meant to be in a general education classroom setting. If your child is not already able to do the general education setting and do the work of the general education setting, and they don't need any support for the actual academic portions of it, right? They're just needing some accommodations, which might mean a little bit more time on the tests, things of that nature, then you should not be looking at a 504 plan, and you should not let anybody talk you into it. Okay? Let's move on to the next one. More will become clear. So part of the reason why you wouldn't be looking at a 504 plan is because 504 plans offer accommodations, not services. So if your child is going to require any kind of an aid, a 2-to-1 aid, a 1-to-1 aid, that would not be included in a 504 plan. That would be an indication that you need to be over in an IEP, right? And we'll talk in a second about what some of the different accommodations are. But you're not going to get speech, you're not going to get OT, you won't get RSP when your child has, you know, a place that they're able to go to work with a specialist on something, tutoring of that nature. It's not going to have any of that services available. So another reason why, until your child is completely ready, we would not allow the school to pressure us into moving to a 504 plan. All right, let's move on to the next one. Number 4, it is very easy to go from an IEP to a 504 plan. It can happen in one meeting, and you just decide on that you're exiting out all the services, and you figure out what are the individual accommodations that the child needs, and they're now on a 504 plan, and they've exited their IEP. It's no muss, no fuss. It's easy to do. One meeting. And sometimes we go, well, I want to do what's best for the child, and the school will say, we think that they're done with their IEP, and so we want to transition over to the 504, and they have all these reasons, yada, yada, yada. Here's my parent-to-parent caution, is that you want to say, let's do this. Let's leave one service on the IEP. Let's try it out for a full year. And let's see if our child can do everything that they need to do with only one service, because then we will know that they are ready to. Because all too often I have seen that a parent gets pushed and prodded into being in a 504 plan, not an IEP, right? Which takes away a bunch of your rights as a parent. I'm just going to say, a bunch of things that you lose and a result, and parents, something happens, and parents go, this isn't working, what do we do now? And they go, well, we're in a 504 plan, we can't put that service back in. And now you got to go through a whole thing of asking for an emergency IEP, and they're like, but you exited your IEP, and it really makes it difficult. So I want to caution you that do not ever agree to move to a 504 plan until your child has exhibited at least one full calendar year of being able to manage without those services, because it will be so hard to put it back in place. When you're ready, when they're ready, you switch to the 504, easy peasy, right? And if you waited the right amount of time, it'll be like, whew, we're done with the IEPs and we're now on the 504, and it all makes sense. But I'm going to ask you something. Why hurry? Why hurry? There is no hurry. If there were any kind of a timeline that we would want to adhere to, it would be that before they graduate, they would, if possible, move to a 504, because we're going to talk about the college piece in just a second. But they don't have to. So who benefits from your child being on a 504 plan, not an IEP? The school does, for lots of different reasons that it benefits them. But how does it benefit your child? Let's worry about that more than anything else. So I would not hurry. If you're in an IEP, don't be in a hurry. There's no badge of honor. My child's in 4th grade and now they're on a 504 plan. No, it's not. So wait. I encourage you to wait, because think about it. If your child's in 4th grade and the school is saying, we want to put you on the 504 plan, okay, great. And maybe you say, I want to do the 1 year thing. Let me give you another asterisk with that. Okay, so they go the whole year, they're in 5th grade, but now we get into junior high. And now the circumstances are different. I would make sure that they go at least a full year needing no services, and that there are no more transitions left. I wouldn't even be looking at it until high school, my friends. And here's the other thing. I would only be switching to a 504 plan if your child is on a graduation track for a diploma and they're planning on graduating after 12th grade. If you're planning on staying and getting additional education because your child's getting a certificate, I would never go on a 504 plan, because you're going to need services at some point, and the 504 plan doesn't allow for that. It's so easy to go from IEP to 504, but if you're thinking, if it doesn't work out, we'll go back. Oh, it's a nightmare on Elm Street, my friends. Don't do it. All right, let's go on to number 5. Colleges do not follow IEP guidelines. They do not have to. It's not a part of a college curriculum. They follow different rules, and they follow ADA rules. So when your child goes to college, if your child is still identifying as somebody who has a disability and they need special accommodations, there is always, and it's called different things on different campuses, but you can ask, where do we go for ADA guidelines and for support and services, and they will direct you to where to go. You will have your child fill out a bunch of papers. Potentially, you will fill out a bunch of papers, because it is important that unless your child, and I'm not really 100% sure on this, so I think it's different if your child is already conserved, then you will have to bring those conservation papers, and then you will already, I would think, when you bring those papers, will be allowed to see everything. If that is not the case, if you have not fully conserved your child and don't have your child conserved for education, your child will have to fill out a paper saying that it's okay to talk to you about the things that they're going to talk about. Otherwise, they can't and they won't. It's illegal. It's a violation of your child's HIPAA laws, HIPAA rights, for them to talk with you. You can't talk to them about squat, my friends. You can't talk to them about your child's attendance, about work that's due. Nothing. It's like your child going to a doctor office. They're an adult, and if you don't have them conserved and they have or they have not signed a paper saying that they're waiving their rights for privacy where you are concerned, then you have no right to talk about it. But at the college level, they will make accommodations for disability. It's a bit of paperwork, and you have to be very specific about what you're looking for. If you're, for individuals that are needing access literally physically via ramps or things like that, you would talk about that. You would talk about any of the accommodations that we'll talk about in a second could be available for you on the college campus. There are many amazing programs that colleges have, even, where they'll record the lecture and transcribe it for your child. So it used to be that you could ask for a person to come and take notes, but now the technology has sort of bypassed that. Now a lot of our kids take their computer and they record the lecture, and then AI puts it into bullet points for them. I mean, come on. Technology is moving and shaking. But it's critical that you understand that they're going to be following the guidelines of ADA, but they're not going to follow the guidelines of IDEA on a college campus. It just changes and it's different. But let's move on to 6, because this is a problem that I see often happen. 504 plans don't transfer to college. I know when we were getting the big push for my son to get a 504 plan and to exit his IEP plan, and I want to do full disclosure, he did. He did eventually exit his IEP and move to a 504 plan, I think, for the last year or two of high school. But we maintained things for probably 2 years before we said, okay, yeah, we're not using anything, we don't need it. And it's just going to be easier for everybody. We're not going to have these meetings, yada, yada, yada. But one of the big things that they were saying to us is, well, you want to get on the 504 plan before they graduate because then it'll transfer to college. Well, this is a lie, my friends. This is not the truth. Colleges don't take your high school 504 plan and immediately implement it. They want to start from scratch. So if your child were to stay on the IEP all the way through when they graduated and then they went to college, you're going to be a little bit behind in terms of you haven't already been through the 504 process, so maybe you don't know the kinds of things to ask for, but you're not that far behind. Because that plan that you had in place, you can bring it and say, well, here's what he had in college. But they're going to say, but what does he actually need? What does she actually need? They're not going to transfer the 504 plan. And a lot of times, this is what I heard from the school, but it'll transfer. No, it doesn't. It might be helpful as a guideline, but it doesn't automatically transfer. The college is not automatically going to accept what you had in the paper. It doesn't work that way. So don't think it, don't plan for it, and don't be bamboozled into agreeing to go to a 504 plan so that you'll be all ready for college. It doesn't work that way. If your child comes in with no 504 plan in place, college will help to set it up so that it will run for them the way that it's supposed to do. Okay, number 7. There is no need to have an IEP plan and a 504 plan. So imagine, and you could. This is one of those asterisks. You can have both of them if you want them, but it becomes redundant because the IEP plan has a place in the IEP for services, and it has a place for accommodations. And it legally is required to make sure that the child has access and that the access is equitable. So built into the IEP is everything that you would have and would want in the 504 plan. So it's just 2 documents to babysit. It isn't necessary. If you feel better about it, you could push for both of them, but it becomes extra that isn't needed. But let's remember that the 504 plan does not have everything that the IEP plan has, right? So if you need more, if you need structure, if you need special education, anything, if you need any kind of services, then you would always want to be in the IEP plan. And if the school is telling you, no, we'll switch to the 504, but they can still have speech, my friends, run screaming with your hair on fire, because that's not how it works. And I've seen schools do that. So IEP when you need a little bit more support. 504 when you're really close to not needing anything, you just need a couple of accommodations. All right, let's go on to 8, which is where I think we talk about the accommodations. And Chris, can you full screen that for me? I'm old. I know, I set the type. So some of the things that you could ask for that would be specific to the individual, you could ask for more time on tests. You could ask for preferential seating, which is a really important thing to ask for. You could ask for specific testing materials. You could ask for visual and physical accommodations. You could ask for sensory accommodations. You could ask for specialized equipment and much, much more. Sometimes for the 504 plan, you can ask for a device that the individual is able to take notes on, or to record, or to do their work on. If somebody is having difficulty with handwriting and they can type, you can ask for a computer on which to type or to take their notes. So it's very individual what you would ask for in a 504 plan for accommodations, but remember that in IEP you can also ask for these accommodations. So if you've been in an IEP, one of the things that we generally do is we transfer all the accommodations that were in the IEP over to the 504 plan. You may remember there's a cartoon that we've shown before on the show, and it shows the first part of the cartoon shows 3 boys who are trying to watch a baseball game. But they can't all access the baseball game in the same way, because in the cartoon, one of the boys is very tall, and there is a curtain that is put up, but this boy, he's tall enough he can see over the curtain, and he has a view of the entire baseball field. So he's got no issues. He's got access. But for the second boy, he's not as tall as the first boy, and he stands up next to the curtain, but the curtain hits him about eye level. So he's able to see a little bit. He's able to see over the curtain to see some of what's happening on the field, but he cannot see all of it. That's not equity. And for the third boy in the cartoon, he's significantly shorter, and he stands up against the curtain, and he is not able to see anything of the baseball game because he is not as tall as the curtain. And this is not access at all. This is not equity. And in the second part of the cartoon, they show you equity. They show that the first boy is still able to stand there, and he can see over the curtain. He's got the same access he had to begin with. But for the second boy, they've put a box there on the ground that's just tall enough that when he stands on the box, he has the same view of as the first young man. He can see over the curtain now, and he can see everything that's happening on the baseball field. And for the last boy, who is shorter, he has a taller box, so that when he stands on his box, he also can now see over the curtain and has access finally to be able to watch what the other 2 boys are watching. So what ADA says is that everybody needs to have fair and equal access so that they have the same opportunities. I remember being a very young girl, and here was my mother who had a physical disability, and we would go, I remember going to a museum when I was very young, and we got there, and my mom was in a wheelchair, and there were all these concrete steps to go up to get into the museum, and my mom, there was no ramp, there was no way for us to go, and so we all left. We never went into that museum because there wasn't access. And then ADA came along and said, this is not allowed. So now all public buildings have to be accessible for anyone, whether it is someone who is hearing impaired, visually impaired, physically impaired, or has sensory issues. Every single place that any of us could go to has to be available and open to all of us. So, and this is what 504 seeks to do, is to provide that equity. So the accommodations are meant to level the playing field. So we made this starter list here, but if you think about for your child, what would level the playing field? And it may be that, for some kiddos, there's a hard and fast rule in a classroom that we don't allow headphones, right? Except for your child, that might be the thing that they need to be able to handle the sensory input of the noise of the other kids, is noise canceling headphones. That might be, right? And it might be that the teacher wears a microphone that's in sync with the headphones so that they're still able to hear the teacher, but they're not having to hear everything around them. That's a perfect example of an ADA 504 accommodation that doesn't require services. And make sure that we're all aware of the fact that the accommodations are individual to the person so that they can gain access. Okay, let's move on to number 9, because we're really starting to get a clear picture here. So again, not to belabor this, but 504 plans really are for equity and access. The difference here is that an IEP, the goal of an IEP is that there be an educational benefit. So both of these things are great, right? But the question here becomes, which one does your child need? Does your child just need access and equity and access, or does your child need some educational benefit, some services that are robust enough to be able to make it equitable and have access? And that's really the crux of the conversation about should they be in the IEP or should they be in the 504. It starts to get clearer and clearer and clearer. Let's move on to number 10 and see if we can't drive this puppy home. So 504 plans don't have to track progress. What? What you talking about, Willis? Yeah, I think this is the big shocker and one of the consequences that I don't think gets discussed when you are at an IEP meeting and trying to decide, are we going to the 504 plan or are we going to the IEP? So the 504 plan, you remember when Ron Popeil used to do the thing about set it and forget it, right? So the 504 plan becomes a thing where we set it and forget it. It does need to be implemented, and if things aren't being implemented, then you would go to the school and you would say, hey, we literally have some disability discrimination happening here, and it needs to be addressed. There is not always a clear path for how to address a 504 complaint at a school, but you always can reach out to ADA and say to them, my child is being discriminated against, and things start to move very quickly after you do that. But if you are used to an IEP where your child has to have 4 quarterly reports per year to tell you how they're doing on their goals, to have more communication with you so that you know what's going on, it is kind of a cold shower when you get to 504 because you're not going to be having meetings. And sometimes people go, woohoo, I don't want to go to another IEP meeting, right? But if it's what your child needs and there's a discussion that needs to happen with the teacher, the IEP is a safe haven, right? Whereas the 504 says we whittled it down to they get to have preferential seating because there's too much noise happening in the front of the classroom. We want them sitting in the front row. We want them sitting by the door. Wherever the preferential seating is for them, that's where we're going to put them. Then we don't need to debate this anymore. We don't need to discuss it anymore. It just becomes the thing, and we don't track the progress. So there's nothing to track, right? We've agreed this is the accommodation. That's where they're going to be, and you're just looking at your child's report cards and your parent-teacher conferences to know what's going on. That's hard for parents who have been on IEPs for a long time because we look for those benchmarks 4 times a year. By the way, if your child has an IEP, it is illegal for them to not give you those benchmarks. Usually it comes with your report card. I've had a recent rash of parents saying to me, we're not getting the benchmarks, the quarterly benchmarks. Two things I want you to check. Go back and look at your child's report cards and see if it's attached there, because it should be. If it isn't, it means that your plan, your IEP plan, is not in compliance. And you should use that language and say, we have not received benchmarks. You are out of compliance. We need an emergency IEP, and you have to figure out what's going on. Because in their minds, they may have already switched to the 504 plan. But if they don't have a 504 plan and you still have an IEP plan, then they cannot make that argument. They're in breach of, they're out of compliance with that contract that is the IEP. That's actionable. So make sure that you're getting the regular benchmarks. But I have seen too that at least half of my families who said they weren't getting them, they didn't realize they were attached to the report card. So please check and make sure that you're getting that. But know that in a 504 plan, poof, there's nothing to track, and there is no tracking. And if you're having a difficulty with something, you are like every other parent, and you're asking for a parent-teacher conference. And they will tell you when they can do that, and there is no law in place that says they have to listen to you within a certain amount of time and that they owe you something. When we exited the IEP, all of that is gone. So let's go back and think about this now. Now that you know all this about the 504, I can hear Bonnie Yates in the background going, why would you want to do that? And there are reasons why you would want to do a 504. I can tell you, for us, there were some accommodations that we were having that were getting in our son's way. Sometimes that document is written so stringently, and you have a very conscientious school who's following the letter of the IEP, and they don't feel empowered to go, hey, let's try something today. If your child is doing well enough, and by well enough, I mean that they are meeting their academic goals, at least at a C level, right? With no other necessary, like if they're at a C level, but you're having to pay for private tutoring, I would not let the IEP go, because you don't know what you're going to need down the road. But if they are at the point where they're doing C's or B's, or even A's, and they're not having any tutoring, and we're not having any behavior issues, and that would mean to me that challenges had come up, that there were things that happened, but there was no behavior issue. They weren't having to call you to say, oh, and then your child did this, right? If your child is still occasionally having behavior issues, I would not let the IEP go. You do have some disability protections under 504, so that if something were to happen, because there is a whole concern about, should your child engage in a behavior that is considered inappropriate in the school setting, that could harm themselves or other people, or they even said something. We have had many circumstances where one of our kiddos has stood on the playground and very loudly issued an inappropriate threat towards someone's life because they didn't know what else to do. That they felt that they were being bullied, and they had reasons, and they yelled something to gain the person's attention to say, stop bullying me. But schools have a zero tolerance policy on threats and statements of that. So in those cases, often that child is the child who issued that is removed, that statement. Our child on the spectrum is removed from the school and sometimes put being expelled. And there are rules in place to protect all individuals who are considered disabled. That they can't be continually expelled and not allowed. They have to have access to their education, right? So there is a rule that they cannot be expelled for more than 10 days in a given year. And if they are expelled at any point up to and including the 10 days, there is a manifest determination hearing to decide if this is the proper setting for this individual, because they may be asked to go to a more restrictive environment. there is an asterisk here that if the behavior that they engaged in was seen to be a behavior that was as a result of their disability, then it is a different set of rules. And that is true. I'm not a lawyer, but my experience of it is that is true whether they're in a 504 plan or in an IEP plan. That would be, it's just a matter of when you are gathering support for your argument about why this actually was impacted by their disability, which set of rules do you go to? That's really what it's about. If you think about anything, if you were going to go to court for anything, you decide which thing are we arguing. And for IDEA, for IEPs, we're always arguing, what is the free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. That is always the argument, and we're looking at which part of that is the thing that we argue. For ADA, you're constantly looking at how was the child's access to education hindered due to their disability. So, for instance, and again, not a lawyer, but if I have a child who has stood on the playground and issued a death threat to somebody else, and it happens, my friends, it happens. And we all look at it and we go, okay, what happened beforehand, right? We know what the behavior is and what was the consequence. The consequence was that they got expelled. If I were arguing it from an IDE perspective, I would go in and say, this child probably needs a one-to-one aid because you have other miscreants walking about this area and somebody said something to them, and this child, because their understanding of the world is this, and they were by themselves in that moment, they had no recourse, but this is what they said because they were defending themselves because their understanding is such because of their disability, right? And I would be arguing for a service for that person to have an aid to help mitigate these circumstances with the other kids. That's what I would go in and do. If it was the same child and they were on a 504 plan, I would go in and argue in an entirely different way and say, this child is being harassed by another child, and so as a result, because of their disability, they returned with something that was verbal, but this other child was being harassed. Now, I can't ask for services because it's a 504 plan. I can ask for accommodations. I can ask that this child be separated from the other child. You see, it's an entirely different argument, but I can say in the 504 plan that this child harassing my child is preventing them from being able to attend and be present for their education, and that child is literally preventing access, and ask that there be distance between the two of them. It's a different argument, and it would have a different outcome, and depending on what the child needs, right? And how well the school is able to keep this person at a distance. You will find, just because we're talking about this, that if it involves another child, they will not tell you what the intervention is for the other child because that violates their HIPAA. It's the most frustrating thing in the world. When a child is harassing your child and you want to know, well, what's being done about that, and they say we're handling it, it does not feel good. And I say to parents, do whatever you need to do to protect your child. But, be mindful about what the rules are, but do what you need to be able to protect your child. It's a really difficult thing. So I'd love to hear from you guys if you have any questions about this. But again, I go back to the Bonnie Yates thing about why would you give up ground, negotiating ground for the 504? And again, because sometimes our kiddos are ready. But I would say to you, if you're not sure, probably your child is not ready. School is going to tell you that your child is ready for a 504 plan much sooner than they are. And, is that a carte blanche statement? Yeah. But I think in general, schools are I'm not going to say schools, I'm going to say administrators are much more optimistic about what our kids can do and what the timeline is. You'll find that a lot of teachers are like, well, let's keep the support available until we see if they can handle it. It's the kinder, gentler way to do things. It costs more. And that's why the admins, everything costs more. If you have kids on an IEP, then you have to have a yearly meeting, and every 3 years you have to have all this evaluation. That takes time and staff and money to be able to do all of that stuff, and you're held accountable for it legally. You have to do the benchmarks. You have to make sure that you're doing everything, and often they don't get it done right, and then schools end up having to write families checks because they didn't get it done right, when they're not in compliance. But when you're on the 504 plan, it's the set it and forget it thing. And accommodations doesn't cost the school anything, nor is it extra personnel that they have to put on. That's all services. So schools love a 504 plan, and there's nothing wrong with a 504 plan if that's where the kiddo is, but most of our kids aren't. Let's be honest. They're working themselves to get that way, but I would caution you greatly if your child is in 4th and 5th grade and they are needing any kind of support at all, don't get talked into the 504. Does that make sense? Okay. I think I have time. I got through that all really, really fast. But let's talk a little bit about what the rest of the week is, and then we'll see if it occurs to me anything to come back and talk to you guys about. On Thursday, tomorrow, we are doing the Best of Autism Live, and I truly think that this is one of the best interviews that I've ever been a part of in the 14 years that I've been doing this. It's the interview that I did with Shane Neumeier, and they are just a wonderful influence. I would like to spend more time with them. I definitely, if you did not see it the first time it aired, I really want to encourage you to check it out. I do think it's one of the more important things I've done and that we've done. And then on Friday, for our Ask Dr. Doreen Granpichet we're replaying one of the best of episodes, her talking about making it fair, how important that is. Just in terms of this IEP 504 conversation, because it really does change the way you look at any issue that you're having. And let's talk about it through the make it fair thing. That if I have a 4th grader who is in class and, there's a problem going on. Let's say that they just they get to a certain point of the day and they're not wanting to do their math. They're not wanting to write the math, and when that happens, they start to engage in a behavior, and they start spitting on their hands and playing with the spit and doing all that, right? If it's an IEP plan, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at, okay, well, what's happening beforehand? Well, the beforehand is they're having difficulty with their math, but is it that their hand is hurting because they've been writing, like it's happening at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a regular basis? Is it that their hand is hurting? Is it that they've just come in from the playground and it's hard for them to recenter? Is it that they're tired? Is it that they're eating something at lunch that they're allergic to, right? There's like so many questions about what could it be and different ways that we would support. And for an IEP, one of the things that we would look at is observing what's happening during the lunch period. But we would also ask the OT to come and do a pullout and see if at a different time of day, are they able to do the math, and is it really about the handwriting thing? Because if it is about the handwriting thing, we would work on strengthening that with the OT. If the OT takes them and does the math at 8 o'clock in the morning and everything is fine, then we have more information about the fact that maybe they're tired. Do they need to take a break, right? We could build all kinds of things into the IEP to be able to help them to overcome this period of time when they don't want to do their math, right? Whereas with the 504, I don't really have services that I can put in there. I can make accommodations, which is that they have more time to work on the math, or that they can take it home and work on it. And maybe that will be effective with some kiddos, and with other kids, not so much. So I hope it's all starting to make sense for you guys in terms of which path is right for you at which time. 504 is great. And if your child goes to college, you're definitely going to be in the land of 504. And it will be useful there. But If your child is in anything before college, IEPs are almost always the preferred choice. You have more protections. And if a challenge comes up, you have a bigger tool bag from which to work. Everything that you would have from the 504 is there, plus so many more tools to problem solve with. Why would we give that away? So I encourage you, don't give up your IEP. Now, is school going to pressure you? Yes. But always turn it back around. You know that thing my grandmother always taught me, when somebody is asking you a bunch of questions, start asking them questions, right? And if school is saying, well, we want the 504, then I would start asking them, based on what? Based on how are you seeing that all of these services that my child currently has that they don't need? And if they come back and they have actual graphs and things and say whatever, I wouldn't cop to that. I would instead ask them for an IEE. That's an individualized education evaluation. And that's not done by the people at school. But by the way, the school pays for it. So you would ask in writing and say, I would like an IEE. We do not think it is time for our child to exit their IEP. We still feel that there is a educational need for services, blah, blah, blah. And usually an advocate will tell you, pick one of the services that makes the most sense that your child still needs, and really dig in your heels, and they'll give up on it. They'll give up on it, and they'll let you keep the IEP, and then you put a couple of more things in, and you keep it going. It still protects you for everything you would have for the 504, but you get the extra stuff as well, and the protection that if things, at any point you have a problem, you have a platform on which to support your child, and you don't have to start from scratch, which is what you'd have to do if you had the 504. Let's all take a breath. That feels like it was a lot of information. But again, I want to go back to the parentcenterhub.org. Great resource, you guys. Thank you so much, Chris. It's just such a great resource. You go to that page, you find the place where right on the top it says find your center. It'll have you pick your state. Then you pick some states, like California has a lot of them, but every state is required to have one. And a lot of the things that they do are online, that they offer education, seminars, and but the first, I say to everybody now, the first thing to do is to just find your center and call them and tell them what you're looking for and listen to the kinds of ways that they will be willing to support you. I always am concerned about giving out a resource, and I try to do it myself first. And that when I first heard about this, I went through and I found what center it would be for us, and I called. And I was leaving a brief message. I said who I was and what I was calling about. And as I was hanging up my phone, I had an incoming call, and I was like, oh, I wonder, I don't recognize that number. And I clicked over, and it was them calling me back. That's how quickly they called me back. And I talked with them, and I said, hey, I heard about this. I'd never known about this before, and I want to know the whole 411, how much does this cost? And she was like, it's free. And I will tell you that if they find that the kinds of things that you need surpass what they are capable of doing, and sometimes that happens, right? They will make a recommendation that you get a lawyer or an advocate, and they will give you a list of people that they recommend in your area. So all of it's paid for by the federal government. It has nothing to do with your school district at all, so separate payer. So I encourage you, go take advantage of this resource because it's free, and it may lead you to other things, because as we said in the beginning, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an advocate, I'm not a paid advocate. I often go to IEPs and advocate, but I'm a free advocate when I can. So I hope all of that is helpful to all of you. I hope that sheds some light on it. If your child is completely included in Gen Ed and needs no support whatsoever, they are not needing speech services, they are not needing OT, they don't have APE. I'm trying to think what else you might have. If there's no aid whatsoever, they really aren't using any of the RSP or tutoring that is available to them as a special education student. but they still are using accommodations, then and only then would you exit your IEP and go to a 504. Anything less than that, please argue with your school. Don't build the whole case for yourself. Ask them what their rationale is. As I was saying before, once they come back with it, if they've written some things, ask for an IEE before you decide anything. That's an impartial person who, and by the way, the school will tell you, well, we want you to do the IEE with this person. No. You get to choose. Ask around in your local area. Call the Parent Center Hub. Say, we're asking for an IEE. Do you recommend anybody? Right? Because you really want that to be impartial. School will pay for it. If they refuse your request for an IEE, and they shouldn't, but I'm seeing this all the time, that if you're in disagreement with them about something, and they say they want to put your child on a 504, and you say, I want them to stay on an IEP, and you've picked a service that you really dug your heels in, and you say, we want this service still, we believe that it's appropriate, that it's still necessary, all these things, right? And they say nope, and you say, we'd like an IEE, and they say nope to that, definitely go to your Parent Center Hub, because you're probably going to want to get a lawyer and advocate at that point, because it's not appropriate. I can't say enough about that. Anyway, I hope this elucidates a little bit, and please write in with more suggestions about the kinds of things that you want us to cover on the show. We're more than happy to do whatever we can and get an expert in to talk about things. All right. So make sure that you tune in tomorrow for that show with Shane Newmeyer. Amazing. And then on Friday, Ask Dr. Doreen, Making It Fair. And we've got great shows coming up next week and all of July. So thrilled to be back with all of you then. All right. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.